Son of a shit. I put my left foot in the right pedal. Can't get it out. Oh, Jesus. What's up, guys? I'm Jeff, the founder of Worldwide Cyclery, and I'm here to tell you about all the different types of clipless pedals, which one's best, and the pros and cons to each of them. All right, so you've probably heard the debate of Shimano pedals versus Crank Brothers pedals, and maybe you've heard about some other pedals out there like Time or HT. So what I have here is sort of the four most popular / common mountain bike clipless pedal types. And when I'm saying clipless, I'm talking about pedals that you clip into. Long story behind why the term is clipless, but we do have a video of flats versus clipless where I explain that. You can check that out as well. We're going to go over the different types right here and sort of how they're different between each other. So if you're considering clipless pedals and you've got all these different options to buy, you're probably realizing you've got Crank Brothers and you've got Shimano, and then you've got a couple other smaller brands as well. So Crank Brothers is my personal favorite. It's what I really enjoy, and this is my bike right here. I run the Mallet E's on there. Crank Brothers versus Shimano versus Time versus HT. A lot of it does boil down to personal preference, so it's good to test these things out. But if you don't want to buy all these and test them yourself, I can give you some of the pros and cons to each of them right now. So Crank Brothers, they use the same, I guess you could call it, clip mechanism in all of their pedals. And the difference between their different models is the egg beater, which this is just as simple as it gets, right? So this is what you're going to see on a cross-country bike. It's ultra lightweight. It has zero platform at all. The cleat just goes boom right in there and clips in. So the purpose behind the egg beater pedal, obviously they named it egg beater because it looks like an egg beater, is weight. So you don't have any platform, so you might get that kind of icy feeling. I would never ride these things. I don't ride cross country. I'm not really that super concerned about weight. I like a little bit more stability, and I tend to do more trail, enduro, downhill riding. So I don't ride egg beaters, but you see these on cross country bikes all over the place, and a ton of World Cup racers that do cross country run egg beaters. A little more platform are the Crank Brothers Candy, and then again, this doesn't have pins or anything, but because it has a little more platform, a little more contact point on your shoe, so you have a little more stability with the Candy. And then you have the Mallet E. They also make a Mallet DH. This is the pedal that I run and I prefer because you can actually adjust these pins right here, and it gives you a lot of stability. So we also have a really long, in-depth video on how to set up Crank Brothers pedals properly. So there's a lot of different adjustments you can make to these things to sort of optimize how they feel and how easy it is to get in and get out. So pros and cons of the Crank Brothers pedal design. One of the pros, it clears mud super well. So if you get mud packed in here and you go to stuff that cleat in there, the mud then just sheds right out of the bottom. So that is a huge pro versus something like a Shimano SPD style pedal, or even a Time pedal, or even an HT pedal. So these clear mud the best of all of them, Time probably being the second, then HT, then Shimano. That's a huge pro to the Crank Brothers. Cons, you can't adjust how tight the spring is. That is something people complain about because on Shimano, and on all these ones, Time as well, and HT, you can actually adjust that spring tension. And once you click in, that spring tension determines like how locked in you are. Crank Brothers have a little bit more float over Shimano, and you can also adjust the float depending on which cleat you put on which shoe. That's a cool pro to it. But the con, you can't actually adjust that spring. I don't necessarily think you need that. A lot of that you can adjust by how much contact you have with your shoe to this platform around it. You obviously don't have that ability with the egg beater pedal. So that is kind of a con. You're stuck with the spring Crank Brothers gives you and how tight and or loose that thing is. Again, these are my personal favorites, and a lot of people ride these. I have no idea the actual statistic between how many people that ride clipless are using Crank Brothers and Shimano and these other brands, but I can tell you it is widely Crank Brothers and Shimano, and then a small percentage of everything else. Probably Shimano SPD being the biggest, I would assume, but Crank Brothers is a huge contender there and my personal favorite. So that's kind of the rundown of the Crank Brothers pedal system. I guess we could talk about one last con to these things. This whole mechanism does roll in here, and this is sort of a pro and a con depending on the way you look at it. So if you go to clip into this pedal, you can actually roll your foot at it and it'll roll the whole mechanism and clip onto that cleat. And if that works, that's awesome, and it's a good feature. You don't have to have like a perfect entrance to it. You can actually roll on forward or roll on backwards, and it sort of makes it easier to get into that thing. The downside to it is if you come in and you do that, you can sometimes not actually catch that cleat on there and it just rolls right off, right? So that rolling issue, if it doesn't catch the cleat, is kind of annoying, and you're not going to have that with any of these because none of these pedals have a rolling sort of cleat mechanism like that. It does happen to me when I ride every now and then. I'll go to clip in and it'll roll off, and some people hate that about Crank Brothers. I've gotten used to it, and I feel really confident getting in and getting out of these things. And on the downhill World Cup circuit, where a lot of riders are riding clipped in these days, the vast majority of them are using Crank Brothers. In my opinion, I think it's because it's easier to get in and out of these than any other clipless pedal. And the adjustability with the pins is awesome. So again, a lot of that's personal preference, but that's sort of some of the pros and cons to these. The next thing up is the Shimano pedal. So this cleat design, SPD, Shimano Pedaling Dynamics, I believe it is. Shimano licenses this to a whole ton of other brands. So here's an example of a brand that uses the SPD system. It's iSSi. They make awesome pedals, a lot of different variants. This is sort of a trail model, which is similar to the Shimano one. But the SPD system, it'll always disclose if it's SPD because they're obviously licensing the design from Shimano. And this has been around for ages. And Shimano makes these without a platform at all. They make them with a platform like this, which is sort of their trail model, and they make them with a larger platform. They're Saint, and I think they have like a BMX version as well that's got an even bigger platform. But they all use the SPD system. The SPD system, you can adjust to the tension of the spring right there, and that's how tight or loose it's going to be when you go to clip into that thing and clip out of that thing. So that is a nice feature, right? Because if you're sort of a beginner on clipless pedals, you can loosen that spring a lot, and it makes it really easy to get out of that thing in a pinch, where if you kind of forget and you have a panic attack and you need to yank the cleat out of there, and it's pretty loose, it'll actually yank right out of there. So that is an advantage to all of these systems, whereas a Crank Brothers doesn't have that adjustment right there. So aside from that, with the Shimano pedals, they don't clear mud all that well. You can see, you enter the pedal this way. If there's a bunch of mud packed in here, it's going to smash into the spring and kind of clog right here. It doesn't roll, obviously, so it's not the best at clearing mud. A lot of people still use these in the mud, and it doesn't really cause a problem. I mean, that's up for debate. Depends on the mud. Some mud will just like push right through and is slippery. Other mud, it's like much more clay and Play-Doh-y and might clog those things more. But that's sort of a pros and cons. The Shimano, they don't quite have as much float as a Crank Brothers pedal would or a Time pedal would, and that's something some people either dislike or they really like. I remember arguing with a friend in the early days saying, oh, I love Crank Brothers because they actually have a little float, and I feel kind of like comfortable because I can move my foot a little, and if I'm moving my body around, I could kind of adjust my feet. I really like that. He's like, I hate that. I want to feel locked in if I'm clipped in. So it was clearly just a difference of opinion. Not one's better than the other. It's just a little bit of a preference.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
But if you want a little bit more float, go Crank Brothers. If you want to feel a little more locked in, go Shimano SPD version. And again, you don't need to buy a Shimano pedal. You just need to buy something with the SPD design. And that's kind of, I think, probably hands down the most popular design out there. I don't know if Crank Brothers has overtaken it or not. It seems half and half, at least in the US where I'm at and from what I see, but I have no idea which one has more market share. But those are by far and away the two most popular clipless systems. The other two that are gaining popularity and kind of from smaller brands are Time and HT. So Time, you can tell it's actually very similar to Crank Brothers. It has that, a spring right here, and you can just look, the way that there's those two bars on the top. It's pretty similar to a Crank Brothers pedal. The difference here, though, is it doesn't roll. So if you hate that Crank Brothers roll, but you like the other features of Crank Brothers, this could be a win-win for you. The other thing is where it competes with Shimano is it has an adjustable spring tension. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Time has not had a huge amount of traction in the mountain bike world. They're more known for their road pedals, but these could probably very well be much more popular in Europe than they are in the States. You rarely ever see these in the States, but an awesome pedal. You actually see them more often at BMX races. Like if I go to a BMX race out here locally, Time is a pretty popular pedal. You almost never see Crank Brothers. You see Time and Shimano, because BMX racing, they want to lock down that cleat super tight because they're yanking on it so hard. And when you can adjust that and make the spring super tight, BMX racers love that, that amount of adjustability. So Time has a really awesome platform design. They're not as popular in the US, but a really good thing to consider if you want to be able to adjust that tension and you want sort of that same float and awesome like entry and exit as you have with Crank Brothers. So definitely a cool pedal. Next up is HT. So HT is probably more famous for their flat pedals. They make amazing, super thin, lightweight flat pedals. And this X2 pedal, I'm not exactly sure on the development, but I think it had a lot to do with one of their riders, Aaron Gwynn, which is one of the best downhill racers in the world. He rides these things, and from what I recall, he's had a lot of input developing these things. You see these a lot in the downhill World Cup world. It's kind of more like a Shimano than probably the other ones here. You can adjust the spring tension on them. It's got sort of that bar mechanism looking thing that the Crank Brothers and the Time have, but then the front of it, or actually that's the back of it, is a little bit more like the Shimano pedal, the way it clips in. So these things, in my experience, and probably every customer we've sold these to and every one of my friends that's used these says, my God, I cannot get in or out of these pedals. They're very hard to use. They're very stiff, very tight, don't have a ton of float. And if that's the feeling you're looking for, you'll love these things, which is why they're popular among really talented pro downhill racers, because they want something that locks them in tight. Those guys ride bikes for a living. They're super talented at getting their foot in and out of their pedals. So those guys love them. You might hate them. If you're just starting out with clipless pedals, do not try these. If you're very versed in them and you've been running them a while and you're considering them and you're looking for that tight feel where you can adjust with the pins and it feels nice and locked in, you might really like these. So a lot of it does boil back down to personal preference, but these ones are definitely the two most popular, Crank Brothers and Shimano. And then from what I can think of, I think Time and HT are probably the next two runners up, at least as of right now. These ones are gaining popularity and pretty common in the mountain bike world. But let us know in the comments, do you guys use any of these? Do you have another type of clipless pedal that you use that you like? Or do you just hate clipless pedals and ride flats? Hit that subscribe button and we'll see you guys in the next one.